some people say, hey, you know what? I don't have a discipline problem. I understand on living on less than I make, but I'll tell you one thing I don't love is I don't love the idea of investing. So when you're thinking about behavioral science and what you can impact, one thing you have to do is you have to overcome the fear of investing. And I think a lot of people approach it, and it seems like this foreign, frightening, scary thing.
Well, I hate that people have gotten this thought that investing is dangerous or scary. And look, I'm willing to share in the short term, it potentially could be. But I think if you hang out long enough, long term, it's pretty amazing. And we have a great illustration. We always talk about the cycle of market emotions. And I just know about humans, we typically are our own worst enemy, is that when we have peak opportunity, meaning markets are getting crushed, we get scared to death. When you have peak scary times, meaning you should be running the opposite way, we typically get greedy.
That's
and
right.
We're all loading it up. So cycle of market emotions is something you definitely need to understand when we're talking about behavioral science.
And a lot of people don't realize that cycle exists, that it's sort of this somewhat predictable pattern. In contrast to that, most folks think, or a lot of people when they begin investing, they think it's really like gambling. 55% of Americans, according to Magnify Money, believe that investing is just as risky as gambling. So showing up in your Roth IRA or in your 401k is no different than showing up at the casino, and that just could not be further from the truth.
Well, I grew up in a house where I think that this we resembled this.
You
my
saw
parents,
this, yeah.
My parents thought investing was risky to the point that their biggest investment was buying CDs. And I think about what a crazy thing, because this falls under that behavioral or understanding, is that what seems risky in the short term might actually be your biggest resource in the long term. And
because like saving in CDs, you're not going to keep up with
By the way, buying CDs is risky in the long term. So it's just this inversion of the reality just because you perceive this as risky or gambling. We got to get people over this barrier.
And while you may think that keeping money on the sidelines and not investing is the less risky behavior, there are some real costs associated with this. You've seen this illustration before, but we want to show you how valuable time in the market is, how costly it can be if you sit on the sidelines. Do you realize if you just had $10,000 invested from 1988 until 2023. So this is a long period of time, nearly 40 years that we're covering here. If you would have just invested that $10,000 at the beginning of the period and left it invested, by the time you got to 2023, that $10,000 had turned into almost $420,000. I want you to remember that number, 420.
Well, this is why you don't have to be the best investor, because I think a lot of people think, well, I got to buy low, sell high, and that's the only way to win. No, we're just telling you, just be there. Be there for the good days, be there for the bad days. And we're nerdy enough, by the way, if you see this, because you just said it's close to 40 years. We actually, this is close to 13,000 days.
Oh, that's
so if
huge.
you think about it, so let's talk about out of 13,000 days, what is this, a few days? But what happens if you miss 5, 10, 30, and even 50 days?
If all you did was miss the 5 best performing market days from 1988 until 2023, rather than that 10,000 turning into 420, that 10,000 only turns into about $264,000.
Gutted it with 5 days.
5 days. If you just miss the 10 best days instead of 420,000, you end up with about 191,000.
We've lost over half of it just by 10 days.
If you miss the best 30 days, so a single month, the best 30 days of the market, that 10,000, rather than turning into $420,000, only turns into $71,000.
I mean, and the big crescendo, 50 days, which is not that many more. I mean,
Sure.
like I said, out of 13,000 days, close to 13,000 days, we're talking about a rounding error, but we could take that 417,000 all the way down to 32,000. And we all know none of us have the sports almanac. None of us have the flux capacitor. So we couldn't do this if we wanted to. So just go ahead and save yourself the calories, the mental horsepower, and just know that you're going to be committed to stay into this market.
So how do you do it? How do you combat that? Well, that's the other good habit that you can build. And Brian, you say this all the time. The key is always be buying.
ABB, baby. Always be buying. That's for sure.
This is the idea that no matter whether the market is going up or whether the market is going down, you're putting your dollars to work. And the beauty in this is that it's a win-win. if you're investing every single month and the market is going up, then the money you invested last month has made money. That's great. If you're investing every month and the market goes down, then the money you're investing this month is getting in at a lower level than you got in last month. So if you can reframe your mindset to always be buying, you're already going to set yourself up on the winning side, because we know that 8 out of 10 years, the market goes up. It's only down about 2 years in a decade. So if you can get your money to work, odds are over the long term, you're going to end up in a better place.
Yeah, I like that it lets you gamify this. Essentially, just as you shared, this is a great tool for volatility because it's going to let you affirm and feel like you're checking the box on taking advantage as a financial mutant of the bad times. But then it's also going to be stick with it enough so that the next point that we're trying to bring forward is stay the course. If you're not staying consistent with your investing, you're missing out tremendously.
Yeah, all of these other habits were things that you need to do, right? So you need to live on less than you make. You need to overcome the fear of investing and actually invest. You need to always be buying. Staying the course is kind of the other side of that coin. Hey, what do I not need to do? I don't need to deviate from my plan or change my plans. I need to recognize that if I can just stay true to myself, if I can just stay grounded, this thing works. And Brian, you say this all the time, that if you ever get uncertain or you're ever unclear or something makes you feel nervous, there's a really good thing you can do to help move you in the right direction.
When in doubt, zoom out. Look, I've already shared it. My parents thought when the stock market was risky, it was gambling. And without a doubt, if you look at this in this short term, it looks like this is chaos. I mean, if you look at annual rates of return of just like the S&P 500 or a 60-40 portfolio, if you were trying to even add some diversification, it looks like you're like, why would I do this? Do you see what emotions this would probably just bring up in me? Why would anybody stay the course if you look at all these random dots
and
that are on the screen?
For those of you out there in podcast land, what we're showing is investment returns from the early 70s all the way through the end of 2024 on an annual 1-year basis. And it looks like a wild scatter plot. There is no rhyme or reason. There are dots that are above 0%. There are dots as high as 30%. And then there are dots that are below. But there is no rhyme or reason. It looks completely random. But like you said,
when in doubt, zoom out.
When you zoom out and you say, okay, how do these returns look over a 20-year rolling period? Well, now it's incredibly consistent. It doesn't look so sporadic or so random. You can see it is pretty clearly centered somewhere around that 10 to 11% long-term rate of return that, dare I say, over this time period looks fairly predictable.
I mean, I know in the intro I talked about decoder. This looks like a decoder. I mean, if you can, when in doubt, zoom out, you all of a sudden that chaos becomes something that has purpose, that seems somewhat consistent. There's just a lot of ahas that should be popping off in your brain, definitely behavioral-wise, when you see this type of illustration.
But you may be thinking, well, yeah, but I've just got the world's worst luck. I understand this, but man, what if I start investing? You know, this is the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. This was personal computer and this was internet. Look at stock returns over the last 20 years. If you pick any year from 2004 until 2024, and you just said, hey, if I started investing this year, and we're just looking at the S&P 500, what would my rate of return been 1 year in the future, 2 years in the future, 3 years in the future, so on and so forth? And what you can see is there is not a 5-year period in this 20-year period that if you would have started investing, you would have had a negative rate of return. Even if you started investing in 2007, right before the Great Recession, if you can zoom out and give it enough time, after 5 years, you were back to making money. You were back in the green. You were back moving in the right direction. And this assumes that you weren't someone who was already buying through it. If you were buying through this, you were positive much earlier on. So if you understand how markets work and how investing works, you can set yourself up for financial success.
This is when people say, how long should you plan on having your money invested to even consider investing in the stock market or a diversified portfolio? There's a reason. It's the science and the math of this calculation of the 5 years of all. And that's why if you're trying to save up for a down payment or an engagement ring, and that's going to be in the next 2 years to 3 years, you're not investing that money. And this chart is the perfect illustration. And it also brings to focus that things over the long term it's not random anymore. It really does streamline nicely when you see how close this all aligns if you can just stay the course and think like a long-term investor.